My aunt's house. I lived with my brother and parents in a flat in the north part of the city. Due to a legal procedure, then we were evicted from that flat, so we split up. My parents and brother went to live in a flat near the area, and because I had no money to pay rent, my aunt offered me to live in the second house that she and her husband have. This house was located in the east zone of the city, a bit far from my work, and, well, the area that I used to live for more than 20 years. However, it sounded like a promising way to start my independence. The house is located in a zone that is not very safe, and the periphery around my house is a bit shady. But it's worth to say that it's a really big house with a big metallic door, big kitchen and living room area, and 4 double bedrooms, 2 complete bathrooms, an extra service room, and a little quote-unquote chapel. Second side note. My uncle studied to be a priest, and then he studied psychoanalysis. He was a very well-educated man. He knew a lot about black magic, tarot, and exorcisms. That kind of stuff. Third side note. This house was used as a consultory house, so anything related to therapy or any other kind of stuff that he needs to sort out was dealt with in this house, conferences and seeing patients. So the first time I arrived, I had a spooky feeling about it. I went into my room and had difficulties to sleep. Then, about 2300 hours, I heard 3 massive bangs that came from inside the closet. Shit myself, called my aunt. She said that it was because of the neighbors, but to be honest, the sound was quite loud to be the neighbors. Every night I came in from work, I felt quite agitated and quite anxious. After closing the main door, I had to run upstairs to put the lights on. That was until I came into my room. Once again, I usually avoided all the other areas of the house. The only other area that I would go to at night was the bathroom, which was right next to my room. Some creepy noises were common during the night. It was also common to hear a window opening, which was even more scary. One day my girlfriend stayed overnight with me, so she went to all the rooms in the house, checking everything just to find anything spooky. So she found a cassette with what supposedly was a therapy session, according to the label. When we played it, it was the following. Michael was speaking with a woman, and this woman was saying that she was having a headache. Suddenly she said, voices in my head are trying to say something. Then my uncle asked what they were saying. Completely out of the blue, the woman started speaking with a really deep, guttural voice and said something in a language that we couldn't understand at all. Then my uncle asked her to explain herself. The guttural voice said something else, and then the cassette stopped. After this situation, more creepy things started to happen in the house. Suddenly, a lot of big and creepy spiders and scorpions were seen around the upstairs rooms. One night when we were playing cards, something moved the main deck from the middle of the table to the left corner of it. I could barely sleep. I started to leave the side lamp all night on. I used to sleep from 2 or 3 a.m. until 5 a.m. There was a really creepy feeling around the house. There were some, void areas. The main ones were the kitchen, the quote-unquote chapel, and the room that we found the cassette. If you were there, you could easily feel that someone was behind you. Finally, I said all of this to my cousin, and she explained to me that her father, my uncle, did one kind of quote-unquote exorcism in that house, and that he knew that something was wrong with it. But for him, it wasn't too bad. All the audios were just to prove that kind of things were real and relatively common. I lived there for just 2 months. It felt like I was there for ages. It's a funny fact, the only person that used to go there regularly was my uncle and my girlfriend. But they all just went there once when I was moving out. She stayed in the car park area the whole time. Some month after I moved, I asked her why she didn't go to that house regularly. She said that she doesn't like it because she knows the house is haunted. Then she started laughing. I accidentally conjured an evil spirit that tormented me and my family for 3 years. Growing up in a Christian household, I knew the battle between good and evil existed in our world, whether we saw it or not. Going to church and Sunday school every week, I was taught about the Word of God and how He wants to have us live. But in Sunday school, I was never taught that my faith would make me a target for several demonic spirits that would eventually attack me and my family for 3 years. What started as an evil spirit attaching itself to me eventually culminated into 2 separate events. The first event is a situation that won't be included in this story. I have to sort of cram it. I'll try to make the retelling of my story as quick as I can. But the basic gist of the first event was a situation where the entity that followed me everywhere ended up physically attacking several of my classmates at my friend's birthday party. The second event being in my church, where my sister was maliciously attacked by an unseen force. She was pinned to the floor by members of her church as they prayed over in a large group. That I will explain, for it was the event that ended a series of intense spiritual battles that overtook my family's life. In 2014, my family, along with 11-year-old me, resided in Tucson, Arizona for a job opportunity that my father was given to start a new business. Our original home is in Colorado, where I was born and raised. We needed a scene change in our lives, so we left the Rocky Mountains and landed in the desert. Needless to say, I never got used to the number of cacti I saw wherever I turned. Come spring break, my family took a trip to Avondale, Colorado to visit my cousins. I've got love, plural, for cactus. The house my cousins stayed in was quite literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but open fields and corn stalks. The nearest neighboring house was half a mile down the dirt road. As if my cousin's house wasn't creepy enough, it was so far out in the country in the nighttime that it was like especially dark. I always remembered having an uneasy feeling about the property itself. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful house, not to mention its huge size. It has 2 floors, including a basement and a modern layout with a cement exterior. The house was so big and so isolated you'd be able to see the house driving several miles away. My cousins were the only family to have lived on the property, so any possibility of deaths on the land was out of the question. The house my cousins lived in had no conceptual reasoning to be as creepy as it was. It wasn't until one night my cousins and I were about to go to bed. My cousin Savannah told me why she didn't like sleeping in her room at night. Every few nights she would see a little girl standing on the edge of her bed and stare at her. Just the thought of that scared the shit out of me. Couldn't blame her for not wanting to sleep in her room. As a matter of fact, Savannah had taken the opportunity to sleep in the living room while we were visiting. Me, Savannah, and her friend Taylor, we all huddled up in the living room and treated it like a fun little sleepover. When Savannah told us she was seeing that little girl, we ended up staying on the topic of, scary stories and things like that. This was when Taylor told the story of Courtner Road, a story that would soon become very personal to my life. Courtner Road is an actual road that sat about 10 minutes away from the house, and where legend spreads that a man went crazy in the house and he lived in with his family. The old man savagely murdered his wife, son, and daughter, skinned the family dog. The old man was so out of his mind he hung his daughter's body in a tree branch that hangs over Courtner Road so everybody who drove past could see it. In a fit of rage, the old man lit his house on fire. Now all that remains on the property is the outline of destroyed walls and a basement. Taylor and Savannah told me they'd both gone to the property at some point and confirmed that all that's left standing there are the remains of fire that burned the house down. At some point I asked if anything had happened to them as they went to the property. They responded with a list of things that people they knew had experienced in the past, and, when they went, things like still seeing the little girl in the pink dress hanging in the tree and her father tied her to it. Or maybe seeing the family's white dog chasing away from the property. But the worst one for me was seeing a tall man in a black cloak showed itself to the people that visited and continued to haunt them in the future. But knowing these were just stories to freak me out, I passed them off. Eventually we stopped freaking each other out and fell asleep. Savannah and Taylor slept on the only 2 couches in the living room, leaving me to sleep on the carpet floor with a blanket and a pillow in front of the couch Savannah was laying on. Around 12 in the morning, I'd woken up from a heavy sleep. Everyone else was sleeping as well. Savannah snoring, Taylor stretched across the couch in a way that's sure to give her back problems when she wakes in the morning. I sat up from the floor and peered into the kitchen to look at the time in the oven. Sure enough, it was only a few minutes past 12. I looked around the house as I sat on the floor wide awake. The weirdest part is that I didn't even feel uneasy, or that somebody was watching me. It wasn't until I looked toward the foyer and saw him standing there. My heart sank to my stomach as my brain connected the dots. Standing in the center of the foyer, in the front of the main entrance, was the figure of the tallest man I've ever seen in my life. Abnormally tall. He was so tall he was hunching over and stared directly at the floor. I was unable to see his facial features as he continued to stare at the ground. I even contemplated in my mind and was making out what I was seeing. But the more I stared at him, the more real he became. His entire body was covered in black, with a hood that sagged over his head almost as if he were the perfect embodiment of the Grim Reaper. His clothes made him look almost cartoonish, with his hands at his sides as he continued to stare directly at the floor. When it became clear that's what I was staring at, a coldness flowed through with a sensation as if the blood in my veins had turned to ice. I quickly tucked my head under the covers, hoping that whatever was standing there just wouldn't notice that I saw it. But it became clear that it was intact towards me. The voice of a man spoke through the blanket and into my ears as his lips were speaking directly above my head. Speaking in a language that sounded like gibberish. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I knew in my heart that his intent was to hurt me. I could feel it. It took strength out of me to snap out of it and to scream for Savannah to wake up. Several times I screamed for her, each time getting louder and more urgent. But the third time I shouted, the voice above me had stopped. I heard Savannah's groggy voice asking what I needed. Quickly hopped onto the couch beside her and cried as I told her and Taylor what had just happened to me. I didn't leave the couch for the whole night. Didn't even go back to sleep. I sat in shock and fear, watching television, waiting for the sun to come up. I didn't experience anything supernatural again until we had gone back home to Arizona. To sum up the next few months of my life, I began needing to have white noise playing while I went to sleep, or I'd hear the voice of a tall man calling my name over and over again. I also slept with my closet light on because I was scared of being surrounded by complete darkness in the circumstance. The worst nights were when I'd wake up and feel my bed mattress vibrating and breathing. For years, the entity continued to make its presence known, not only at night, but even throughout the day. Daytimes when I'd notice shadow figures running around my house. I had confirmation that I wasn't just making it up because my dog Harley would react when I was seen, either by growling at the figures or following them where they'd run off to. Flash forward about a year later to my mom and dad are deciding to get a divorce. My mom took me and my sister Jessica back to Colorado where all of her family reside. This time we moved to Colorado Springs, stayed with the family of friends until we had enough money to get a place for us to stay. By this point, my sister had been tested and diagnosed with PNES, post-non-epileptic seizures, a mental illness that the spirits that followed me would soon take advantage of and target my sister. Being extremely financially unstable, not knowing if we would find a place to live, while battling my father in court for custody of me and Jessica, my mother had a lot on her plate, and that was the perfect opportunity for the entity to strike. What started out as convulsions, Jessica's seizures soon turned violent. When Jessica had an episode, she began screaming for help and crying in agony. There was pain on her face. Jessica would explain to her mother that during these episodes she would see several shadow figures surrounding her, holding her down and whispering horrendous words that threatened her. Jessica was being oppressed by several demonic spirits, and her mental health took a toll. At the age of 16, Jessica had attempted suicide more than once. Her doctor was convinced that she was showing signs of schizophrenia. She was eventually sent to several different psychiatric hospitals throughout the next few months. In the short amount of time that we'd have Jessica home with us, we would attempt to go to church every Sunday. But as expected, Jessica's episodes would become more intense and violent than ever. Her episodes got so bad we would need to leave halfway through the service. My mom, desperate for help, would cry on the way back home. The grace of going to church had been stripped from us. My sister was persistent to try to return to church as much as she could. But the day that all hell broke loose was when Jessica stayed for an entire service. When the service had ended, Jessica almost immediately collapsed to the floor and slipped into another episode. A member of our church and close family friend, Wayne, had quickly run to Jessica on the floor to help her. Wayne wasn't prepared when an unseen force had attacked my sister as she lied in his arms. Jessica screamed the most painful and blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. A scream that I'll never forget either. She was sobbing for someone to help her. The attention of a group of church members quickly rushed over to Jessica and saw what was happening to her. It didn't take them long to surround Jessica like a swarm of bees, placing their hands on her and prayed in a powerful way I've never seen before. Several church members began speaking in tongues, holding her to the floor as Jessica wailed and struggled to push them off of her. This episode continued for at least 10 minutes before Jessica had become unconscious and lied limp in Wayne's arms. A few minutes more praying went by, and Jessica had finally regained consciousness. She cried about what had happened, and she was embarrassed, but most of all, she was crying tears of joy that their prayer had stopped and, this whole attack on her. That was the last time Jessica's seizures were like that. She still has seizures to this day, but they've transitioned back to the convulsions that she had when they first started. And eventually, so did the experiences that pursued on to me at night. It wasn't until recently when I was talking to my mother about my experiences as a child when I realized that they had stopped the day of Jessica's last episode in the church. That's when I knew it was important for me to tell this story, for people to understand that evil in this world exists and how serious of an issue it is. Over the last few years, I've researched as much as I could to gain some sort of an understanding of the events that occurred in my life. I had stumbled upon the Courtney Road story several times in articles. The legend stays the same, but with more research, I've found out the real story of what happened on Courtney Road. The tale everybody hears now was made during the era of the Satanic Panic in the 1970s and 80s. A man who actually knew the family on Courtney Road personally made a statement that the old man and his wife died in the house due to natural causes in the 60s. Their children are alive and well to this day. The rumors and stories of the old man killing his family led to trespassers on the property. They'd conjure up spirits of what they thought was a family that died there. It was called when the house was set on fire, destroyed to stop people from sneaking onto the property and the things they were doing there. Finding this information has only made me sort of warier of what haunts the property on Courtney Road. I've never ever been on the property before, but whatever it was, we gave recognition to the night I saw the tall man followed and traumatized me for 3 years of my life. Whether it was what haunts the actual property or not, the entity manifested itself as the idea created in the minds of naive kids. We invited something that we could not handle, and that is the message the world needs to hear. A playmate I don't remember. This is a story that my mom tells all the time because, in quotes, I have a special connection with everyone around. I always thought this had something to do with her being my mom, but other people have told me the same, that they feel as if they know me their whole lives and particularly calm when I'm around. This happened when I was around 4 or 5. My mom was in charge of that year's senior class, and as it was tradition in the school that they would have a road trip to a ski resort right at the top of the Andes between Chile and Argentina for a whole week, some parents and me, since my dad was working in the north back then and couldn't be left alone. During the week we had a great time with their class, but I would usually go to the hotel to play in the 3rd floor lobby with a blonde friend. As I always told my mom at least this, and that I liked to play with him because he had old toy cars, and she said it was okay because she could hear us play in the lobby in the hallway from our room. My mom thought that he was just another kid staying in the hotel with his family, or one of her students. That was until the day that we had to leave, when she spoke with the hotel manager. My mom asked her if I had been in trouble for the other family staying there with the noise of both kids playing around the hotel. To which the manager went white, said that we were the only group staying in the hotel that week since it was not skiing season yet. But that it was known that a British kid had died there during a blizzard in the 60s. Not the kid, as their company all year round pretty much. He's always been very friendly, but never played with others. Now it was my mom's expressionless face that went white. She said thanks for everything, hopped on the bus that would take us down the mountains. During the trip, she asked me about this playmate I had in the hotel, and I gave her a full description of a blonde boy wearing green pants and a jacket with a sort of funny black tie and a yellowish shirt. I also told her that he always felt kind of cold, except when I invited him to play with me, and that he had cool old toys. I started to think that I was in trouble. Well, she told me there was nothing to fear. Everything was all right. We have pictures and videos of that trip, but to this day, I cannot remember anything about that week. I've been followed by the paranormal for the vast majority of my life, and here are my experiences. The first experience is actually more akin to several experiences all wrapped up into one house. When I was much younger, at around 12 or 13 I believe, we moved into a house in a nice little neighborhood near the school I was attending at the time. It was a ranch-style house, which means instead of being multiple stories, it's just long. The front door was on the left front side of the house, and immediately to the right of the door was a large panoramic window looking into the living room. The living room led into the kitchen, my sister's room, which contained the attic. From the kitchen, if you went left, you went into the dreaded basement. If you went straight, you went to the backyard. If you went to the right, you would hit the bathroom, my room, and my parents' room in that order. Now, I should mention this house was built into a hill, so half the basement was sticking out of the ground, and my room was technically the second floor off the ground in terms of height. Now that I've gotten that word vomit out of the way, I'll start with the actual experiences. With small things at first, objects would never be exactly where we left them. The dogs would stare at things that weren't there, and every once in a while we would see and hear things like shadows or knocking and scratching. It seemed as though when we agreed to just ignore it, the activity got worse. Much worse. The dogs would bark and sometimes even pee in fear of things that we couldn't see. Objects began to be thrown. My father even told me that he had heard two little girls trying to get his attention. Felt him tugging on his leg like a child would. The worst part was the basement. Cliché, I know, but it's true. The second I stepped on the stairs to go down, this overwhelming feeling of dread, fear, and despair would overwhelm my body, and it felt like I was paralyzed. I saw humanoid-looking figures shuffle along the floor, heard angry yells and shouts, and one time when I was coming up from letting the dogs out, I even felt something angrily grab at my ankle. Safe to say I didn't go down there unless I had to. The activity only got worse as time went on. I began hearing disembodied voices speaking to me late at night. Footsteps when I was home alone, and the dogs were with me. Even seeing faces and figures out of the corner of my eye. I began sleeping with a fan and a noise machine to cover up the noises so I might be able to sleep properly. But they only got louder. The bathroom was in another creepy place. If you crossed the bathroom at any point after 9 p.m. and before 6 a.m., you could see what looked like a man with a blacked-out face staring at himself in the mirror. I remember blanking out at random, having visions of myself dying in gruesome ways and even waking up, like, in the air, for lack of a better term. Everybody in the house but me saw a doppelganger of myself on multiple occasions. They said it looked just like me. But there was always something odd about it. Like it had too many teeth or a scar or a cut that shouldn't have been there. My parents still refused to talk to me about what they had found in the attic, and honestly, seeing as we moved out shortly after they went up there to store the Christmas tree, I'm fine with that. I have more stories of this house, but these are the most notable ones, so I'll be moving on to the next house now. This next house is like an apartment complex that we were staying at due to needing a cheap place to live and it being available. I was about 13 or 14 at the time. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a small bathroom, and a living room. It was all in a square shape. My room was in the corner. My parents' and sister's room was in the corner right next to me. The bathroom was in between mine and my parents' room, and the kitchen and living room were on the other 2 corners. Now, the activity in this house didn't happen often per se, but it was still disturbingly strong, as if the lack of quantity was replaced by quality. The bathroom had this weird feel to it, almost as if somebody was watching you go. We've heard laughs come and go from there when we're all in the living room. My room seemed to be the hotspot for activity. I heard footsteps and things would get chucked across the room, and the most notable experience yet took place in this house specifically. Remember how I said I slept with a fan and a noise machine so I didn't hear any noise or anything like that? Well, apparently whatever is in that house didn't like that, because I'm sitting in bed with my head under the covers. Another habit to avoid seeing, hearing, or feeling anything. That's when my fan and my noise machine gets physically switched off as if somebody reached over, turned them off. I don't mean the power went out and I was delirious. It was 10:33 p.m., my phone was plugged up, still charging, and it got deathly quiet. Like, eerily quiet. When you know something is horribly wrong but can't fathom what it is, I get this urge to look out my window. I don't even know why. There's 2 glowing, floating, transparent figures staring straight at me. I couldn't even scream. It's like my throat had seized up. I jumped backwards, letting go of the blinds and concealing the window again, and as under the covers for so long, I started to sweat. Finally, around 11:30 p.m., I gained enough courage to shine my flashlight, turned my noise machine and fan back on, and immediately went to bed. This was the single most notable experience of my life. The next house is actually the one I live in now, from age 17 to now. When I graduated high school, I moved in with my grandmother's house, and she had a spare room and lived within walking distance of where I worked at the time. All you need to know for layout of this is that the house in my room All you need to know for the layout of this is this house. Well, they wrote it weird. It's not my fault. Their room's literally across from their basement door. And apparently that's convenient, as that's where they spend most of their time. But it's also where the majority of the activity takes place. Down in the basement is a massive open room, which in the back left corner leads to another big room with a wood shop in it. The back right corner, however, contains the hotspot room. I've been spoken to in there, had things thrown at me. I've been touched on the neck and told to get out of my domain. All kinds of crazy stuff. My tech setup is downstairs as well, as it's the only place I can sort of scream "fuck" at full volume without my wonderful, sweet grandmother hearing me. Bless you. So I've been playing before, had something thrown at me from behind, and turned around to see that door I knew damn well had been shut with the light on swing open with the light off. The one at that house has sort of scratched the letter N into my neck. Left scratches on my back, even attempted to drag me down the stairs once as I was leaving. I have more stories from this house as well, but once again, these are the notable ones. I'm not expecting all of you to believe every single one of these stories, but if you read this far, I appreciate you taking the time to hear my experiences and what I felt and what I believe happened to me. If any of you have any questions, please, just ask below and I'll answer them. I have some pictures, but I'm not going to dig them up unless people ask for them. My haunted house. My house has been haunted all my life. It started in the apartment I lived in as a kid, but it followed me to where I am currently living. In the past 10 years, I've experienced more paranormal activity than most people have in their lives. It started with an attachment I had from using a Ouija board at 11 years old. Since I have so many paranormal experiences to share, I'm going to limit this post to the things that have taken place in my current home, with a focus on the most significant things to take place over the years. To preface this, I'd like to say that I'm a female, 21 years old, but when I moved into my current home, I was 13. I was living with both my parents. 4 cats and a dog. Now it's myself, Dad, my girlfriend, 3 cats, a dog, and a living room here. The history of the house isn't really overly important. They bought it from a family, and the woman that lived in the house had been moved to hospice. That's where she passed away. Her kids were selling her condo. Her name was Helen. That's as much significant history as there is in my current home. Outside of that, it seems that the entities in our home aren't necessarily attached to the location as much as they're attached to us. A little background on the spirits in my house. I know Helen is here. She's been heard by multiple people. She has a distinct old lady perfume smell and a calming feeling that comes along with her. We also have an unknown number of spirits or entities in the basement. I have a hard time explaining them because I don't really know if there are multiple male human spirits or one inhuman spirit making it seem like more than one. But whatever it is, it feels dark and masculine, if that makes sense. Helen mainly stays upstairs, and whatever is dark typically stays in the basement. The main floor is typically more poltergeist-type activity. That being said, now to some more specific experiences. I'm going to start with the most asked about thing that has ever happened to me. Anyone that knows me or hears about this asks about it. So one day, I was probably around 14 at the time. I was in my bed late at night responding to Snapchat streaks, but being a teen, I laid in bed with makeup probably off. I didn't feel like sending pictures of my face or really putting any effort in. But I also didn't want to just send a black screen. So I was taking pictures of my bedroom door because our hall light was on. After snapping and sending a few photos, my camera started struggling to focus. It wouldn't take the picture because it just kept trying to focus. Finally, the picture took, and it was a dark black figure that was peering in at me in the photo. It was out of focus, and of course, well, I freaked out, but I looked up and saw nothing, so I snapped another photo. That one came out clear, and there was no figure. At that time, I'd say that was the beginning of things taking a turn for the worse. A few days passed, and I'd gotten 3 scratches down my back in the shower. My aunt had heard about what I was experiencing and had a friend who was a Wiccan priest. I will say I wasn't necessarily open-minded to the Wiccan. Seemed like bullshit at first, but this man had told me that there are ways that we can open portals between our world and others. Sometimes our worlds, it's intentional, you could say. Other times, not so much, not always. He told me that candles give off a pure white light. But when set in front of a mirror, that light doubles and turns impure or dark. Hard to explain, but I understood it as a candle alone equals good, candle in front of mirror equals bad. Safe deduction. He said if you have a candle in front of a mirror and look into it, that can open a portal to a darker dimension. Again, as he was first telling me this, I was thinking bullshit. But then I remember just days before I'd seen the figure in my bedroom, I'd taken a photo sitting in front of my bedroom mirror with the candle damn near in my lap. He told me to throw a sheet over the mirror without looking into it, get rid of it or remove it or whatever. And Dad did so, and the second this sort of just sheet was covering my mirror, the power went out, and it was only in my bedroom. The rest of the house was fine. That was when I started to take the Wiccan stuff more seriously. A little while passed, and things seemed a little less dark or aggressive. But something was definitely still there. That's when the event occurred that caused us to call a priest to come bless our home and myself. I had been home alone one day and had experience that's just hard for me to explain. Other people will simply say I was possessed for a few hours. But for me, it's more confusing than that. I have a lapse in time and memory where people are telling me I did things that I don't remember doing. I remember being on FaceTime with my best friend. I'd walked into my upstairs bathroom, which is weirdly a hotspot for activity in the house. The same room I got scratched. After walking in the bathroom, I don't remember anything else until it was hours later. So what I typed from here until I snap out of it is told to me by witnesses, well, if that makes sense to you. My best friend said while to me on FaceTime, the light started flickering in the bathroom. I just stopped talking, and I was staring up ahead past my phone. My friend asked what was wrong. I responded with, "I can't leave. There's someone blocking the door." Right away, she knew something wasn't right and told me to just go out. But I guess I ended up hanging up on the phone, but I had another friend who lived like 2 blocks away from me. So my best friend called her and told her that she needed to go check on me. When she got to my house, she looked for me everywhere. Upstairs, main floor, basement. Looked in every room. I was nowhere to be found. Just as she was coming down the stairs to leave, I was standing in the middle of the main floor. If you walked in my house, you couldn't have missed me. So she asked where I came from, and that she was looking for me. She said I responded so calmly and eerily it wasn't like it was me talking. Told her I'd been in the bathroom. She said, "No, you weren't. I just looked in there." Once she had said that she said that, I completely changed, and she could tell that it enraged me. I told her that she needed to leave, and I even said, "You aren't welcome here." Being a 14-year-old girl talking to one of her best friends, that's definitely not like me. She tried to argue leaving, but apparently the more she did, the more aggressive I got about getting around. So out of fear, she left, and her and her friends just kept trying to call and text me to snap me out of it. 3 hours had passed. Nobody knew what I was up to. I posted a picture on my Snapchat story of myself in the mirror that was covered. The effing portal mirror. With the caption saying something about it being time to stop being scared or stop running or something super creepy. The next thing I remember is sitting on the couch, and the best way I can describe it is this. It felt like waking up from a nap, except I didn't remember falling asleep, or even going to sit on the couch. After that, we had done a little bit more research, and we were talking with a priest and a Wiccan. I ended up finding out that I had an attachment that I created with a Ouija board at 11 years old. And then it only strengthened with the mirror portal. I was blessed, and so was the house, and for a long time things were better. My house is still extremely haunted, and I have plenty more to share those that are just some of the bigger things, though. Smaller, long story short things include hearing a deep guttural growl coming from the basement stairs. My dog won't even go in the basement. Hearing voices, getting touched, and objects moving, and orbs captured on camera. Saw a dead family member at church months after his passing. A couple of years ago, my family, which consisted of my dad, mom, little brother, uncle, aunt, and their 2 children, as well as my other uncle and his wife, were at church on a Sunday afternoon. It was just a regular Sunday Mass. Not anything special. What I remember happening was that all of a sudden we left in the middle of the service. We were walking out and we're going to the parking lot, and I remember that my aunt was hysterical. She was crying and hugging my dad. My dad almost in tears as well. I was around 7 at the time, so I was really just puzzled and confused. But I eventually forgot about it and went on about my day. Years pass and the topic comes up at a family gathering. What really happened that day still creeps me the fuck out. How my family just talks about it now as if it weren't such a weird thing to have experienced is beyond me. But anyways, on that Sunday my family was leaning on one of the walls of the building facing the priest who was giving a lecture. Just because it was a really busy day and there weren't any seats left. About 30 minutes into Mass, my aunt notices a guy who looks almost identical to my deceased uncle in the crowd. She's stunned and elbows my dad to show him what she's looking at. The man she was pointing at was fortunate enough to have gotten a seat, and he was in one of the rows on a bench just sitting there. As my dad is staring at this guy, puzzled and in complete shock, the guy looks up at my dad, makes eye contact, and smiles. Then he just looks back at the priest who's giving a lecture. My dad freaks out. So does my aunt, who noticed that the guy was an exact copy of my deceased uncle. The guy all of a sudden gets up, excused himself from the people that he has to cross in order to get out of the row. He walks towards an exit. As soon as he does, my other uncle walks out after him, in an attempt to catch up to him and apologize for creeping him out. My uncle claims that he followed him up to the next exit where he turned a corner and ended up losing sight of him. Now that's already weird, but my uncle also claims he noticed a scar on the man's left forearm that he knew for a fact my deceased uncle had from a firework accident when he was little. Ever since then, they never really saw that guy again. Some family member of ours have claimed that they've seen somebody who looks exactly like the dead uncle, but who knows if it's the same guy that we saw that day. Anyone else grow up surrounded by the paranormal? For the vast majority of my childhood, my family's been very near to, and I'll explain this, or within haunting circumstances. When I say haunting, what I mean is the stuff that always had very little to no explanation from a realistic perspective. And though I've gone back to and tried to get the evidence, we had of this stuff at the time at least. It was many years ago, and I can't seem to find it. I hope anybody enjoys reading the story. It is all truth, and none of this is fiction. That said, you're welcome to believe what you want. To preface this, I want to mention this. I have 3 siblings that I grew up with. I am the middle child with an older brother and a younger sister, and another brother, the youngest of the 4 of us. I personally believe that children, most especially the ages 5 to 10, have a very acute sense of the paranormal. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. It's kind of like a sixth sense where you can walk into a room and it has an energy about it. Sometimes not even paranormal. For example, I've walked into a friend's home before, and the moment I stepped in the doorway, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of goodwill and happiness. This was weird, because despite feeling very neutral the entire walk over, I felt that happy. And I have experienced the opposite, where I've walked into my own home and suddenly I'm overwhelmed with a feeling of complete dread, danger, and like I'm being watched. The feeling that remains constant becomes normal to you if you live in a haunted home. This sense definitely starts to dissipate as you grow older, more distracted with life, however. When I was 7, give or take, we had moved in with my mom's boyfriend. He was the kind of person to befriend many of the neighbors, mostly because he was out of his garage every night playing music and drinking. Surrounding people were like-minded. One such neighbor lived just across the street adjacent to us. Gotten pretty close with their son. We'll call him T. I spent a lot of time at their house, and it had before described constant feelings of dread. Unbeknownst to me at the time, their house was constantly getting activity. It was causing problems with T's parents, I believe. His mom was fixated on it and constantly recording the home and audio. I guess she was obsessive. T's dad was a military man and more of a skeptic. I guess they clashed about this often. She had a lot of EVPs and recordings of their dog reacting to activity. The most convincing of which was a video of her in bed woken up by the dog growling at the hallway. Her dog's behavior kept escalating to barking and just going crazy. In the video, she reaches for a handgun, think in the nightstand. Then you can hear in a low, growling male voice say, "Are you ready?" She stopped showing us the video here, so I suppose that's all she had captured this night. But for the most part, I never experienced anything in the house beyond what she showed us. But one night, T was over with his fam, and T, my younger brother, and I agreed to head back to his house to grab some toys or something. I can't remember. It's nearly dark outside, but it's just across the street, so no big deal. The house, however, is almost completely dark. We go to his room with limited visibility, and once inside, T begins telling us that sometimes while he's sleeping, he can hear somebody running around in the attic above his room. The attic door is just above his bed. The moment he finishes his sentence, as if on cue, it sounds like something heavy and loud starts sprinting through his attic. Needless to say, we ran out of the house, and they eventually had someone, I'm not sure if it was a priest or what, cleanse the house and do a walkthrough with a family member and also my mom. I remember it was difficult for them, but mostly I remember a story my mom still recites to this day. When we were doing the walkthrough, they eventually arrived at T's room, where she said the energy was the darkest and the most dreadful for her. As she begins to cleanse this particular room, T's mom says something like, "I'm gonna hurl." My mom, clear as day over her shoulder, can hear the same growling male voice say, "Good." She said that she could feel that whatever it was took pleasure in their pain. And for this house particularly, I'll be straight up. I didn't live in it. There's not much to say about it besides what's here. However, when my mom and her boyfriend broke up, we moved out and into our very own haunted house. I have a lot of stories from this house. It's not a very remarkable home. It's not a very creepy home. The Gecko agrees. Just a regular house in a suburban lower middle class neighborhood. But we lived here for quite some time and the activity was daily. Daily is spelled D-A-I-L-Y, by the way. That's nuts. Nothing that went on there was explainable. Nothing. And to start, when we moved in, the backyard was pretty crappy with no grass and weeds everywhere. Wooden patio on the side of the house, concrete at one in the back. In the concrete patio was the name Sarah with a heart drawn around it. Presumably done when the concrete was still wet. I began to have a lot of dreams of who I thought was this girl Sarah. She wore a white gown and had dark hair. I was about 9 at this time. Didn't think much of it until my mom mentioned that she's been having similar dreams. Once we had the house fully furnished, all my siblings and I had rooms upstairs. I shared the largest room with my younger brother. This room had the most activity. We would kind of branch out into the house, with this room being the worst. Started having very vivid, terrible nightmares here, my family being killed in the night in unexplainable ways while I could do nothing. The one I remember the best was all of them being suffocated by vines that grew out of our beds while I was the only one awake and being restrained by said vines. Started to remedy this by listening to music while sleeping. After several nights of music, my younger brother started complaining to my older brother. I needed to stop singing at night. One night my older brother came in and woke me up and told me to stop singing. I hadn't been using the music this night. I told him I wasn't, and he said he could hear it from his room. Thought this was odd because I'd barely been falling asleep when he came in and was still conscious enough to know if I was singing. When he left the room, my younger brother from his bed said, "Who were you talking to?" I told him, which he said, "You never came in my room, silly." I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and there was another time my mom promised that she'd buy me a game if I cleaned my room that night, which was good enough for me. I remember that the entire time I was cleaning, the immense feeling of dread and I was being watched. It was suffocating. I took frequent breaks. It was too much. Complained to my mom, and surprisingly she understood. Everybody in the house had been having similar experiences. She shrugged it off, nonetheless, told me to stop if I wanted to. But if it wasn't done, she wouldn't buy me the game. I was committed, so I continued, and after the conversation while I was cleaning alone in my room, something told me in a shrill, deep, almost demonic voice to get out. I went to my mom, told her what happened. She told me to stop for the night, and out of concern, sort of. The nightmares still continued in this room, and I began to lose sleep for many nights in a row. I was stressed, but soon my older brother was moving out, and I'd have his room. I was kind of relieved at the thought of this. Before he moved out, there was another incident wherein I watched the movie The Ring with him downstairs. When we finished it, he was going to watch the second one. And for some reason, he never disclosed that he really didn't want me to see it with him. He sent me upstairs, where I sat in the loft playing Mario Kart on the way in. That feeling returned. It's unmistakable, very clearly different from the feeling of being creeped out. You know something is there with you because its intensity is so much higher. I complained to my brother 3 separate times now that I didn't want to be upstairs alone right now. He didn't listen. After the last time, I came back upstairs and the bathroom light, fan, and shower were all on. I didn't even turn them off. I was just too scared. I sat on the stairs waiting for the movie to end. At this point, a lot of us kids I mean, kind of lived in fear of our own home and tensions were high. We were always on edge. I got into frequent arguments with my older brother and I developed general anxiety disorder. I was up several days in a row to a week because of the insomnia. I'm probably 13 at this point. There are many more trace little incidents. I can't cover them all, just the major ones. Eventually, my brother moved out and I took his room. My mom took her old room with her new fiancé and used the master bedroom downstairs as an office. My younger brother temporarily shared with his younger sister, and now my mom had the nightmare room. She has several stories of whispering and the cats acting very strange, but one always stood out to me. So one night she's asleep and she hears something open the door, then feels a weight pressed down on the bed by her feet like somebody sat down on it. She assumed it was one of her cats until she heard heavy breathing. She said that she was too scared to open her eyes right away, but eventually she did and nothing was there. The weight on the bed suddenly lifted and she woke up, and now my stepdad asked if he just experienced what she did and what he had. I had developed a very serious fear, probably from anxiety, that somebody was going to break in the house, and my insomnia only got worse because of it. I'd stay up sometimes 4 days in a row and just stare at the light from under my door. Sometimes I'd sit at the door afraid that somebody would try and open it. Often I saw shadows move in the slit under the door, but it could have just been my mind, I attribute my mental state at the time in part to the house, whatever was in it. You'd have to be and live in it for years to understand. Whatever it was not friendly and it did not want us there. Never became content with us being there at all. I've since revisited the house after accidentally sending mail to it and spoke with the people who live there now. They seemed very on edge and would only open the door a sliver to talk to me. Wonder if this is what we were like when we lived there. Am I sleep deprived or is something following me? I'm a 25-year-old law student who moved back home with his parents after college. Recently this year, I've been starting to feel a presence following me around. I feel it whenever I lay down. In particular, my bed. When I lay down, I feel like something, like a child or a small dog, follows me into bed in circles or moves around me. I swear I feel the bed and springs move, or that there's a pressure difference or something's off about the weight distribution. It feels like an animal that I can't see. This is not limited to my home. Once I was spending the night at a friend's. As I rested on the couch, I felt as if his dog came up to my ear and began sniffing. But when I recoiled and looked, nothing was there. This happened several times. I do feel a sensation sometimes as if I'm being touched. Sometimes I also feel as if the thing is sniffing me. I'm also under a lot of stress because of school, so I feel that this might be stress-induced hallucinations. But man, I can't get over how I genuinely feel like something is following me. I can be a jumpy person, but also my house apparently has some history to it. When I was a baby, my sibling, decided to play with a Ouija board in what is now my room, and allegedly my siblings purport that they made contact with the spirit. Also, almost everybody has seen some sort of light, like an audible phenomena, apparition, or shadow people. Things moving on their own. For a while, none of this happened. Only ever so often. But now, similar to my oldest sister, I sometimes swear I hear my mom call out for me as clear as day. Only when I approach my mom. I find that she never called me, and sometimes I think I hear my little sister calling out for me, saying, "Whoa, that must be, Well, anyway, this person's handle on Reddit is called Adolf Oliver Nibbles, because it's saying, Adolf Oliver Nibbles' mom's calling you. That's why I stuttered. I think anybody would. It may be worth mentioning, my mental state is not the best, only because I don't like living at home, plus school and apathy. So, am I in dire need of mental health services, or do we need to bless the house again? We do this semi-regularly. My mom goes around with sage burning, saying a prayer, and we open all the doors and windows and let in the sun as my mom goes about. Then she'll grab holy water and sprinkle some in the closet, corner, bed, door, and window. Everywhere she continues a prayer. Then we light some incense, close the doors and windows. Either I'm sleep deprived, or I witnessed a skinwalker incident. Okay, Skinwalker is a big leap since especially it happened in my own home. But I need at least some form of idea of what happened or closure that this happens to anyone else. And anybody that can pitch in with ideas, or I just simply can't ignore it. I'm a bad writer, so I'm just gonna go straight to the point. Doubting this will get any attention, but it's whatever. You got mine. So I have a dog. Her name is Sagan. Sagan is a canon dog, but from the Google image search, she isn't a brown fur coat, she's black and white. You genuinely can see excitement in this dog. Always hyper, well-trained, smartest dog I've ever had. She's even smart enough to open the door to her room when she wants to go downstairs and eat food and comes back up. Overall, just a glowing puppy. This information is needed, I promise. Alright now, I live with my boyfriend and we both own Sagan. Me and my boyfriend stay up late for his streams for Twitch. We always play Call of Duty or Minecraft or whatever. I don't remember the time exactly, but I'll say around 2 a.m. Sagan was in our room next to my boyfriend set up watching him play. He was hungry, so I went downstairs to make noodles for him. I remember opening the door and I looked at Sagan and talked to her in sort of a baby voice. "Wanna come down with me, Sagan?" And usually if she wants to go, she goes and runs outside the door and waits for you to start the steps and walks you down. If not, she sits down and stares, and this time she sat down, which answered my question. Walked down the stairs, nothing of the ordinary. When finished, I headed toward the stairs with a bowl in hand. Start of the steps, I see Sagan lying in the middle of the stair. She looked pretty shocked at me because usually when she changes her mind or checks up on you, she goes downstairs, she runs to me and just follows me everywhere, every step. I didn't hear the door open if she did it, but I ignored it and excused it, just simply not hearing her open the door anyways. Sagan, she looked tired. I looked at her and she never slept downstairs when she always slept with us. I was kind of worried, but not too much to freak out. Just more like, she's tired, maybe she just wanted to lay there. Indeed, bird. So I pet her, talked in a baby voice and said I love you and expected the door to our room to be open. And like I said, Sagan knows how to open doors, but not how to close them. So, seeing it closed, I just assumed, alright, my boyfriend closed the door. When opening the door, fucking Sagan jumped on me hyper as usual, and I was so startled. I did a 360 to look at the steps, and that dog I saw was gone. I didn't hear the footsteps or shuffling of something going down the stairs, and I just didn't see anything. It happened so quick, it's like the shit teleported as soon as I opened the door. I asked my boyfriend if he let Sagan out of the room or heard Sagan open the door. He said no, and that Sagan was in the room waiting for me the whole time. I told him what happened. He said maybe I'm tired, but the thing was our sleep schedule was completely fucked. We sleep all morning and wake up at 10 p.m. to start streaming. So being fully awake and seeing that really left me speechless. Just lost my train of thought. Only thing I can think was, what the fuck did I touch? I petted her and I felt her fur. I touched that thing that wasn't even my dog. He just said, "Concerning," but laughed that the house is haunted. Made more jokes like, "Sagan, do you have a twin?" Don't get me wrong, I laughed too, but I was still startled. I went back downstairs to double check everything, and while in the kitchen I was just scaring myself, and it gave me goosebumps. After that, I tried to ignore it, but the more I think on it, it just didn't sit right with me. I couldn't be too tired since I was fully awake and fully aware of what was happening. Couldn't be my eyes playing tricks on me since I gotten face to face with this, touched him, looked like my dog, felt like her. It's just such a trip, I need an explanation on it. Nothing really spooky was going on before or after that. Never once I thought, oh, creepy spooky house has a ghost. Nah, this is an actual supernatural shit that I witnessed. I never experienced it again, and then again I sort of am sorry if it didn't make sense. Happy to explain more if questions are needed. My ex might be haunting our house, and I think he wants to hurt me. Last year I broken up with the father of my kid back in March of 2021. We had been together for 6 years, never married, and our kid was 2 years old at the time that we split. He took his life a few months later in October of 2021. In the apartment we used to live together, I would see my kid talking to the wall, or once I thought I saw somebody in my room and I put on my spirit box to see if I could hear anything, and a voice came out saying, "Hey," and then my kid's name. It was in his voice. I didn't hear it at the time, but my new boyfriend was recording and caught it on video. I moved out of the house and into a bigger apartment since I wanted a 2-bedroom apartment for my kid and my boyfriend and I. We've only been there since September of this year. I've started noticing strange things. Since I heard a voice come from my child's baby monitor call out, "Hey." And another time, my boyfriend and I were fixing something in my closet when we heard something like keys jingling but couldn't find the source. My kid's woken up crying a few times, pointing to the bedroom door. Next to the door, I have a small bookshelf with a picture of my son and his father, along with a lock of his hair and my son's hair. This is encased in resin, his ashes and necklace displayed. Sometimes we think we see a head poking from behind a wall in our bedroom at night. I'm always feeling like somebody's watching me at all times, even when I'm alone. Even her cat once sat and just stared at the hallway to our bedrooms and just wouldn't look away. It's kind of unusual for her. For Halloween, I put out a table with a few decorations, and since I'm practicing witch, I put one of my tarot decks out. I set out a few of them, spread out with the death card on top, since I knew it would creep out my friends. I had it in upright position with the other cards. The death card in the upright position means the ending of a cycle. Change is about to come. I had left the house for a few hours after setting it up, and nobody had been home at the time. When I came back home, I noticed the card was still in place, but, well, it was reversed. Death, when it's upside down in its reversed meaning, it's the fear of change and holding on to the past. It was the only card that was reversed. The scariest thing that happened, which was unrelated to the last thing. One night, my boyfriend and I were asleep in bed. I was pressed up to my boyfriend's chest when I felt him shift so his back was facing me. Suddenly, I started having sleep paralysis. Felt a hand grab my wrist and suddenly another hand grabbed my other arm. I couldn't speak or scream. I could feel that something was in my throat, trying to get out. I just couldn't make a noise. I could barely breathe. I hear a sing-song voice that sounded very familiar. "I'm gonna get you in a minute," over and over. I look up to my sleeping boyfriend. I see his head turn around 180 degrees and he has a serious look on his face. It scared me enough to wake up. But not for long as I was plunged into another sleep paralysis. It was almost the exact same things. More hands grabbing my arms and singing that was going to eat me. The only thing that was different was that my boyfriend didn't turn to look at me this time. It was getting harder to breathe. I started trying to dig my nails into my boyfriend's side. My fingers were the only thing I could feel moving. I was sure I was going to die, and all I could think of was that my ex finally had me. That he was going to get revenge for me breaking up with him. At the same time of my sleep paralysis, my boyfriend was having a nightmare that somebody was kissing me, that a bunch of hands were trying to touch me inappropriately. He was trying to fight off the hands to get them to let me go. He only woke up when he heard me struggling in my sleep paralysis. I'm not sure if it's all related or linked to my ex, but since October marked a year after everything happened, and that's when the activity started picking up, part of me believes it's him. I'm not sure what to do. I think he wants to harm me. That doesn't sound good. I pet my uncle's dead dog. In the 8th grade, I lived next to my grandparents. I would visit them pretty often, as I'd go over there and eat and hang out, or go and see my uncle's dogs. Friday after school, I went inside my grandparents' house to greet them. I looked for my uncle, which was nowhere to be seen. Being young and adventurous, I went back outside to the backyard. My uncle had 3 dogs. One was really quiet and was barely even seeable, but at a certain view you could see him. Going up to the cage, I'd usually be greeted by him, but this time I wasn't. I was about to leave until I heard him walking up to the cage, panting and looking in distress, more drained than usual. His eyes were pitch black and his paws had more dirt in his white fur, more than usual. It looked like he'd been trying to dig pretty deep. Oh, the air felt tense. It felt still. The other animals were quiet. The wind was barely blowing. The feeling brushed off as I was just happy to see him. I pet him, even checked if he had food. Did he even have water? And spilt, meaning that he'd been drinking recently. He's a French bulldog, so I wasn't thrown off by how dirty his paws were or the mess that he'd made in his cage. I left after a few minutes thinking nothing of how black his eyes were or how dirty his paws seemed. Going back inside, my uncle greeted me. He then asked me what I was doing before he'd got there. I told him I was petting Kilo, the French bulldog. He laughed, saying, "You're joking, right?" I said no, putting a blank face on as to why he would even ask such a question. His face turned pale, gave me a look as if he was concerned for me. Being confused, I just said, "Okay, I'm gonna go now." Hours pass by, and I visit them again, only I go into my uncle's room to ask him what he means. He gives me a long blank face, then proceeds to tell me that he's been dead and cremated for 2 weeks already. I thought he was playing a prank on me since I was young, but if you don't believe me, look in my dresser. He was there, his ashes in a small medium box labeled with his name and the date when he was born and when he died. It's been 4 years. The only thing I ever really wondered was, what was I petting that day? Ever since that day, I haven't been able to pet a dog comfortably.